Good morning.
Oh, thank you. I get to feel like I'm in a classroom.
Good morning, Professor.
Good morning, Professor Minot. We're thrilled to have you here for the second day of the 2014 People and Technology Forum. We had a terrific day yesterday. It included a rather eclectic group meeting for the inaugural gathering of the Wearable Computing Consortium, and some very interesting discussions that came out of the future of thinking about wearable computing, especially with respect to fashion and to health. We also had the third in a series of meetings around Georgia Tech's future high-performance computing center. And at lunchtime, the wearable folks and the high-performance computing folks all blended together at tables, and I think that actually sparked some rather creative conversations. And then, of course, in the afternoon, we officially started our forum. Hopefully you were here or were attending on the webcast, because I know we have quite a folks available on the webcast side of things. Terrific keynotes by Cha Chen from IBM, and then our own Councilman Kwanzaa Hall. Just absolutely fantastic way to set the context for innovations in technology having such a vital role in our society, but the importance of focusing on human needs, people needs, community needs. In fact, a great discussion around the smart city, where the panel, I think, appropriately decided to reframe it and retitle it the smart community, and the question of what it means for us not to focus on per se the logistics of the city, but focus on the social, education, economic needs of communities. And if we strengthen communities and we strengthen individuals, cities are smart enough on their own and they will probably take care of themselves. We ended the day with a reception that included the exhibition of the history of wearable computing. So if you missed that exhibition, be looking for future notices when you can come to Georgia Tech and see this. This is literally 2-3 decades of work showcased with individual exhibits around the evolution of wearable computing, showing the relationship of interest in wearable computing from a defense perspective, from an assistive technology perspective, from aircraft, from maintenance, all sorts of industrial applications, and then eventually culminating for the exhibit, but certainly not for the future, but culminating in the design of Google Glass. The exhibit was curated by Clint, but in many ways we joked that the first place we started with the exhibit was cleaning out the garage of Thad Starner, because Thad has worked in the era of wearable computing, really has defined it through his work over 2+ decades, and of course he has been the technical lead with Google Glass while maintaining his position and his leadership and his research here at Georgia Tech. So if you did not get to see that exhibition, it will be at IPAT for at least a few more months before it goes back on the road, and please look for future invitations. In case you didn't know about its road trip so far, it debuted in Toronto, Canada, has been to Munich, has been to Berlin, has been to China with the World Economic Forum, I think traveled back to Vancouver, and now is in Atlanta, and I think it will be at the Museum of Design in 2015. So that was just day one. That was only a fraction of a day. Now we have a full day, day 2 of the forum, and we're thrilled to have you join. And this morning we're going to talk about the future of healthcare. Healthcare is a complex system, healthcare as a learning system, healthcare driven towards, hopefully, patient-centered needs and empowering patients. And we're going to talk about everything from research that is happening by undergraduates here at Georgia Tech to hearing from one of the eminent national leaders in healthcare. But we're going to start with the students, because we know at Georgia Tech we love to hear about what our students are doing, how they are being recognized, and how they're taking their own passions around the future of healthcare to the work that they're doing here. So to do that, I want to tell you about the George Fellows Program. This is Bill and Penny George Foundation, which long ago established a program to recognize students engaged in health systems. And one of the terrific things, many terrific things about this program, funded through their generosity, is that this program recognizes students from all across the Georgia Tech campus that are engaged in health systems. So there is an annual call for nominations, but we also continually look at nominations throughout the year. And it recognizes students who have a passion for improving healthcare delivery, the system of healthcare delivery, the patient experience of healthcare, improving the experience for clinicians, and so on. Everyone from undergraduate students to PhD students and from different parts of the campus. So we have a number of George Fellows that are probably awake earlier than is the norm for them, but I would like to ask them to stand right now. I think they're all hiding in one area, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the work that they're doing. So Laura Barag-Wako, she is a PhD candidate in engineering psychology. She works with Wendy Rogers, and her expertise is coming through human factors, and so improving the healthcare system through the medical human factors and through the decision making. You heard me talk about Wendy's research yesterday, a tremendous laboratory and group on campus. She was also recently recognized as a Foley Scholar finalist as well, so terrific for Laura. Sarah Gregg, standing next to her, working with Frank Durso, looking at the very difficult problem of hospital-acquired infections and how do we combat that in the delivery of acute care. We have Philip Grice. Is Philip here? All right, you guys give Philip a hard time later. He works with Charlie Kemp in assistive mobile manipulation for non-expert users with severe motor impairments. Let me translate that for you. Philip works in Charlie's robotics lab about how we can have soft robots, we can have assistive technology robots that are able to manipulate and interact with people so gently that the robot could even help brush crumbs from your face after having lunch, or a robot that can assist you in shaving. So for those of you not familiar with robotics research, this is a huge challenge because we're used to mechanical and industrial robots that are, lifting automobiles. And to have a robot that control the physics of its manipulation to be so gentle and to be so acceptable is a tremendous work coming out of Charlie's lab. Katie Heide is here, works with Craig Zimmerman on the impact of design attributes for intensive care units for nurse-to-patient visibility. Out of Craig Zimmerman's lab, which is a Centigrade lab, I like to describe where this is going to be in the future, the holodeck of care design, that you're able to go into an environment and completely simulate the care delivery experience. And what this group has been able to repeatedly do is to be able to show that our intuition about care delivery and the physical layout and the process of care delivery is often wrong. But if you come into Centigrade, you can work through the mechanics and the human factors and the communication, and you can worry about issues such as visibility and significantly improve care with a relatively low-cost way of doing this research. So just tremendous. Lisa Lim, also with Craig and with Jennifer, who's here as well, looking at the ecosystem for inpatients around sleep management. I think I got to see a demo of the system recently, that it's about controlling kind of the natural light interactions that you would have. For those of you who have ever had to stay in the hospital, it's like Vegas in only one way. But it's like Vegas in the sense that you can't tell kind of night from day, that your sleep is interrupted and your natural rhythms of sleep are completely disrupted. And this is obviously quite counterproductive to healing and to health. So how can we simulate and support sleep management to improve health outcomes for inpatient experiences? This is also part within the Centigrade lab. And then Edison Tomas, who is working with Gregory Aboud and Irfan Issa on measuring and modeling health behaviors, and particularly through eating activities. So we'll go back to those crazy wearable folks. If you see Edison, there's usually a camera on him one way or the other. And part of what he's doing is detecting when people are eating and how people are eating. Because for those of you who have ever worked with food diaries or journaling, folks are particularly poor about putting those in, and especially all those snacks, like the snacks that you're going to have around 10:30 or so this morning. You're not going to put those in your food journal. But if you're wearing Edison's system, he knows that you're eating, and it's quite a contribution to a number of areas that have to look at the relationship of eating to health behavior as a whole. We have some other additional George Fellows who are not going to be able to be with us today, but it gives you a spectrum, again, PhD in human-centered computing, master's in computational science and engineering, more representation from engineering psychology and psychology as well. The breadth of this program and the breadth of the talent of our students is amazing. So would like to recognize them officially and congratulate them. And I hope, and they've been invited to, and I hope many of them will be able to stay to join us for our lunch discussions, and you'll be able to ask them more about their work. So now, almost practically right on time, because we're moving the partner spotlight, it is a real privilege and honor, personally and professionally, to be able to introduce Dr. Bill Stead for you as our opening keynote. I've known Bill for quite a few many years, and I just can't say enough. Hopefully you'll read his bio, and I'm going to call attention to it. But the level of prominence and leadership within the world of health systems and in the world of healthcare delivery. For those of you who don't know, Bill is the Associate Vice Chancellor for Health Affairs and the Chief Strategy Officer at the Vanderbilt University Medical Center. And that he takes that extremely seriously, and it's a very deep and influential role with strategy development, around extraordinary clinical care, training leaders in healthcare, and making fundamental discoveries for health outcomes and for humanity as a whole. He received his training at Duke, so he received his BA and MD and residency training in internal medicine and nephrology at Duke University, and he remained on the faculty there for quite some time. During that time at Duke, you begin to see the beginnings of his career and understanding the relationship between health informatics and clinical care. He was part of the first physician-engineer partnership that developed the medical records, so one of the first practical incarnations of electronic medical records. These are systems that we are still driving towards the adoptions of these today, but they were doing that much earlier. He also helped Duke build one of the first patient-centered hospital information systems. So for all of the work and all the things that we've talked about in terms of how to enable patient-centered care, again, Bill was on the forefront of that back in his very early days. In 91, he did move to Vanderbilt, and he's been at Vanderbilt throughout the rest of his career. He holds the McKesson Foundation Professor of Biomedical Informatics, and he's also a professor of medicine. Just to interrupt the official bio to say our partnership and our research, collaborative research with Vanderbilt is extremely important to the work that we're doing here at Georgia Tech. And one of the reasons that it is so they're such a great partner is because of Bill's leadership and his ability to craft information systems where he has broken down the silos in many ways that I'm not sure how you've pulled this off, but has managed to break down the silos of typical informatics systems to create vast soups or quantities or the availability of data, and then working with his faculty, working with care providers, and working with their research partners and industry vendors to drive novel solutions for patient-centered care. So many other hospital systems, and I know Margaret will nod her head on some of this, so many other hospital systems are stymied by these siloed systems that even if they knew what they wanted to do with patient-centered care, they wouldn't be able to get at the underlying tools to make it happen. But because of Bill's leadership at Vanderbilt, for decades he has driven the availability of the infrastructure for these systems so that advances in patient-centered care can happen more rapidly at Vanderbilt than you would see anywhere else, which I think is a long way of saying aligning organizational structure and informatics architecture. But I hope after his talk you'll get a feel for the extent of what this means. Dr. Stead, he's a founding fellow of the American College of Medical Informatics and the American Institute for Engineering and Biology Medicine. He is the founding editor-in-chief for the Journal of American Medical Informatics Association. Numerous awards, including that the American Medical Informatics Association named the award for thought leadership in informatics in his honor. So not just being an award winner, but essentially representing this entire category of thought leadership. He is involved in numerous activities nationally, numerous advisory boards, numerous reports coming out of the Institute of Medicine. And again, I have been able to witness and value and learn from his leadership in so many ways. And it's just such an honor to have you with us. So thank you. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you, Beth. I probably should quit while I'm ahead after listening to that introduction. But what I want to do this morning is to describe the path to a learning health system, which, as Beth said yesterday afternoon, is a system where the human is in the loop and where the system adapts as it learns. My academic industry partnerships include licensing 2 electronic health record products, one to McKesson, one to Informatics Corporation of America, and I serve on HealthStream's board of directors. The take-home messages from this morning are that complexity is the fundamental challenge we're trying to deal with. And if you're going to achieve reproducible performance and learning in the face of complexity, you need a systems approach. You need to change the computational paradigm as it exists in healthcare today. And we need to change how we think about patient engagement. What I'm going to do this morning is first give you a concrete example of what I'm talking about. And then to set the stage for the panel, I'm going to present alternative scenarios of what a patient-centered health system might look like. So this is a cartoon I drew back in 2007 to begin to communicate the magnitude of the problem. Down the left-hand axis, you've got the number of sets of facts that need to be considered in a decision. And that flat line there at 5 is the cognitive capacity of this computer to handle sets of facts in a decision. And that's not changed since the research in the early 30s. And this is the problem. If you start with just the decisions that are based on the traditional clinical characteristics of the patient, we're bouncing through that limit. You double it as you add structure, genetic mutation. You have an order of magnitude increase as you add genetic expression, RNA, function. And then you add another order of magnitude as you add the effector mechanism, protein. Now, what makes this hard is you actually can't consider those different pieces of information separately. Each one changes the prior probabilities of decisions relative to the others. So you've actually got to have a way of thinking about them in combination, and this is just one such curve. If you look at what's happening with imaging modalities, you get the same curve. If you look at what's happening with our ability to begin to look and understand social and behavioral determinants of health, you get the same curve. So it's combinatorial over what I've described there. And this is a cartoon from the 2013 Institute of Medicine report on better care at lower cost. And what it tries to depict is the cumulative loss as we first fail to translate science into evidence. So we miss those opportunities. Then we fail to translate evidence into care, so we have waste. And then we fail to feed back data from that care to tailor the evidence to both the patient and the practice situation, and that results in frank harm. The IOM over the past decade has painted the case for transforming the system, the non-system, into a learning healthcare system. And it describes that as a system that has the right alignment between science, incentives, practice, etc. Well, I get up in the morning with the firm belief that alignment will not be enough. We, in fact, need new computational techniques and engineering methods that allow us to create and live within a systems approach, to then harness that system for discovery, and to link that discovery directly back into the system for action. So that's what I think we need to be able to do, and I'll try to provide examples of what I mean by that. First, the systems approach to care. Today's approach to care is focused on individual experts. If you think about it, you expect disagreement. Opinion is valued. If you are really sick, you want to find the best expert. What does that tell you about the system? So in the systems approach to care, the focus is on the system. So you have teams of people, well-defined process, and informatics working together to produce the performance you want. So the people provide compassion, judgment, process is simplification, standardization. The informatics reduces the dependence on memory and provides a forcing function. With the systems approach to care, you expect agreement. You expect the right outcome every time. Each shortfall is translated either into just-in-time decision support that helps you avoid a problem, or in terms of iterative correction of the combination of people, process, and technology to improve the performance going forward. So the system makes it easy for people to do the right thing. I'm going to give you an example using Vanderbilt's work around ventilator management, which we picked as the test bed for the systems approach to care back in 2007. As I told Beth this morning, she's heard about this journey along the way. I think I can actually now tell the complete story, one cycle through the complete set of things we've been trying to do. So if a patient gets pneumonia while they're on a ventilator, they have a chance of dying that exceeds 40%. It is a serious complication, and it occurs all the time. This, the y-axis here shows the cases of ventilator-associated pneumonia per month per 1,000 ventilator days in our adult hospital before we started this work. And time is on the x-axis. Now, what we did was first define a standard bundle of practices for the entire enterprise. We then defined how to personalize that bundle to the patient based on their prior conditions, weight, etc. And then we created a screensaver that showed the status of the patient against their plan in real time. Across the top of this, you've got the elements of the bundle. Are they on a ventilator? Have they had screening for a spontaneous breathing trial? Do they have the right clotting protection, the right level of sedation control, things like raising the head of bed, etc. Standard practices. There is a row for each patient. There is a column for each of the elements of the bundle. If two different roles need to act, for example, on sedation, did the clinical team order the target and has the patient responded? Column for each. And it's a very simple paradigm. If it's yellow, turn it green before it turns red. And every one of the 51 people that touch a patient on our ICUs in a day see this. The families see it. It's all out there. So then with this tool, what we began to do, excuse me, was to focus on concurrent bundle compliance. What's the percent of the time that we do every one of the practices at once? When we started, we were down around 26%. At that time, we were achieving each of the elements of the bundle individually 90% of the time. That's actually what healthcare looks at for quality. We look at our performance on points in the system. We don't look at our performance end-to-end across the system. Once we began to focus on this, when it crossed 60%, we had a 50% drop in ventilator-associated pneumonia across the complete enterprise in a 6-month period. And 18 months later, when the University Hospital Consortium reported that we had the lowest mortality, lowest length of stay, lowest cost of any hospital with our level of trauma in the country if you were on a ventilator more than 96 hours. But look at this. That was back here. With the systems approach to care, it just keeps getting better. And the reason for that is that the human is left in charge. So the human continues to decide, when do I want to override the system? But variation is now increasingly intentional. As they override the system, if we see patterns of override that result in better outcomes, we change the standard. And that's what's happened. The CDC finally retired the definition of ventilator associated pneumonia in 2012, so this story will not have any more chapters. Now, with that as an example of the systems approach to care, let me switch to two informatics principles that have to do with how we rethink the computational paradigm in healthcare. Because if you look at other industries, you discover they use 4 different computational techniques in tandem. They use automation to solve problems where you can regularize a small set of data and do something over and over again. They use connectivity, where you want to connect people to each other and to systems. Data mining, when you want to discover relationships amongst very variable, non-regularized data. And then statistical decision support, when you want to correlate multiple weak signals into a robust one. That's how healthcare uses those different techniques. About 90% of healthcare IT is automation, maybe 5% in the connectivity space, vanishingly small in data mining, and maybe about 3% in statistical decision support. That reflects the conventional view of healthcare IT, that the goal is to capture information at the source in a standard vocabulary so it can flow through the system and be easily understood. That simply does not reflect the variability of biological data. I'm a kidney disease doctor when I'm not playing with computers. And we measure the serum creatinine as something that correlates with renal function. But the serum creatinine also moves around with muscle mass, metabolic status. And we don't actually measure the creatinine. We measure a light that correlates with the creatinine. And it doesn't mean anything except relative to the standard that that instrument was normalized with. Now, do you truly think you can move that through the country in an interoperable fashion? My opinion is no. So what we need, instead of thinking of this as a clean data problem, we need to think of interoperability as a dirty data problem. How do we separate signal from noise? That then leads us to the second idea. We've got to separate data from interpretation. And we've got to be able to work with data at multiple scales and triangulate the signals from multiple scales to get an answer. And I use a weather example to try to make my point. This is an example I dreamed up during the Nashville flood, which is now a little while back. But as I watched the community unable to get information, unable to respond, and the ultimate of not being a smart community, I tried to figure out why we couldn't figure out what was going on. And these are 3 different views of weather. The satellite view lets you see the big picture. What kind of a front is it? That's actually a picture of Katrina. Doppler radar lets you look inside the storm and see wind speeds, participation, how the actual precipitation is going, except the rain gauge tells you what's going on in a 4 square inch. My point, if you were to paper the world with rain gauges, you could not recalculate the satellite view. So they correlate with one another, but they represent different worldviews. You cannot equate them. If the rain gauge is filling up and the other 2 views are empty, you better look for a broken water main. So they help you in that way, but they're not computable from one another. So with that idea, let's think about how we then harness data from the system for discovery using an example of how we get data out of our electronic health record. And our health record has data in any source, in any form, aggregated. And so it's got clinical notes, it's got our orders, it's got billing codes, it's got imaging, it's got messaging. And what we do is we run parsers and concept matching algorithms across that, and we compute de-identified avatars. They are so de-identified that they're representative of the patients, but they're not the patient records. And we then keep them in a de-identified research resource that we call the synthetic derivative. Currently, we've got a little over 2.2 million records, about 1.4 of which have adequate clinical data to support discovery. If the patient does not opt out, we then capture what would otherwise be discarded blood from their routine testing, and we bank their DNA, and we de-identify its ID, and we use a one-way hash to be able to link these things together as a discovery resource. We've currently got about 37,000 with dense genetic data that we have out of about 176,000 samples that we currently have. So that's the platform. We then develop algorithms which let us run across billing codes, clinical notes, medication, labs, and test results, and calculate the probability that that avatar represents a disease subgroup, such as type 2 diabetes or a patient who's been on drug X for time Y. We then pick a sample of 100 records, randomly have two physicians validate the algorithm, and we tune it until we get whatever predictive value we want, always greater than 95%, but it varies. Then we deploy it against our biobank, and we find out whether we can replicate previously studied results. Does this extract of patients match what has been proven in the literature? Once we know the algorithm lets us find such patients, we can then use it to discover new hypotheses. We also deploy it across a network that was originally 5 other sites. It's now greater than 10 that are a network supported by NHGRI. And we distribute the algorithm as pseudocode so that those sites can actually program it against their electronic health records, and we validate it against that larger network. And then we can do in silico discovery across our collective biobanks. And this is an example. So one of the things we did was we wanted to find a population of patients with normal hearts. So we looked at people that had a normal EKG, and our NLP across their records showed nothing that would cause an interference with their electrocardiogram or would be indicative of cardiac disease, although we did allow people to stay in if they had a family history of cardiac disease. We found 5,200 plus such individuals across the 5 emerged sites. We then found genetic variations associated with QRS interval in normal hearts. So the QRS is this middle piece of the electrocardiogram where the ventricle is depolarizing, and if it is longer than it's supposed to be, you have abnormal heart rhythms. And there's been a lot of work around genetic association with long QRSs in people that therefore are, by definition, in people that have abnormal hearts. We wanted to find out what happened in people with normal hearts, which you can only do from electronic health records, because all other forms of this kind of analysis start with some form of disease state. We were actually finding the people that didn't have that. And we pulled the genotypes on those people. We analyzed the association of the duration against the variants they had, and we found an association with a genetic variant at this location on chromosome 3. We then ran the trial forward because we had longitudinal records on these people, and we looked for when clinical disease emerged, or if it emerged. And what we found, for example, was a significant increase in the likelihood that they would develop atrial fibrillation if they had one mutant haplotype, an additional increase if they had 2 mutant haplotypes. This kind of study took us less than 3 months and cost less than $50,000. You translate this to how we do conventional trials, they're 3 years and around $1.5 million. So it's just an example of how the system can learn. Now, how do we link it back into the system to support discovery? This slide depicts a study we did taking the 52,000 patients in our medical home and running through the de-identified biobank and identifying which of those patients had received one of the 56 drugs that the FDA lists with black box labeling as having genetic biomarkers that you should pay attention to when you're writing prescriptions for those drugs. And this is the number of such drugs a patient was getting and the number that they got. So 9,000 got one of the 56, 8,000 got 2, and so forth down that slide. 65% of them got 1 or more within a period of 5 years. So based on that, we then created a predictive algorithm which looked at the likelihood, excuse me, that a patient would receive one of these drugs. And if that probability score was greater than 40%, we began to routinely test a panel of 184 genetic mutations that either were known to be associated with a drug where you should change how it's being prescribed, or were promising candidates for future research. We began to systematically, if that algorithm fired and you were in the Vanderbilt clinic, we then obtained that test, part of our standard of care. We deposited in the record. We did not confuse you or your doctor with the data. Then, as somebody began to prescribe one of these drugs, we would look at that data, and if there was something we should say about it, we would release that as just-in-time decision support, saying what change should be made in the medication and how it should be done. When a drug-genome combination became relevant for a patient, we would release it in the patient portal in lay language so that they could then begin to understand what we knew just about that piece of information that had become relevant in their context. Now, our Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee is in charge of deciding when the research has reached a point, and we never do this on only Vanderbilt research. We wait till the research is in the published literature to avoid the challenges that Duke got into a couple of years ago. But they decide when it's ready, and at that point, we turn on that decision support, and that piece of the record becomes active. That's what I mean by predictive, preemptive testing. This is the result of the first 10,000 patients and the first 5 drugs that the P&T committee released. So they were things like Plavix, which is important if you are post having a stent, the statins, which you all know about, warfarin, et cetera. And the red is the percent of the time that drug has a very high risk problem. It basically would be associated with mortality. The blue is a medium risk, which would be associated with a multiple-fold increase in risk. And the white meant that there was no actionable variant. Drug by drug. Combinatorially, 91% of the first 10,000 turned out to have something that we actually used in decision support. So that's the start down this road I was trying to describe. So now I'm going to switch. That's an example of what I mean about a learning health care system. Now I want to sort of shift the lens to set the stage for our discussion in the question and answer, and then for the panel to think with you about what a individual-centered health system might look like. I didn't call the individual a patient, but be that as it may, we still have got to figure out what to call that thing that's not about a patient. Don't think citizen's the right word for this context, but we need the same idea. And so start with just what's the state of play in American medicine today. Then I'll give you an example of what today's best of class is, and then 3 alternative views of what the future might be, so that we can think through what we might want to do. So this is today. If we have a person, that's obese, has hypertension, and has arthritis, she's likely to see a physician periodically. She's likely to see multiple physicians for those problems. She's not likely to have regular follow-up, and she's not likely to be getting the results she wants. I mean, this is amazing to me. I don't know how many decades it is since the Framingham study, but the fact that in this country our control of hypertension is still less than 50% is just amazing to me. Excuse me? Well, it unfortunately describes many people. So that's really the state of healthcare today in this country. So it's a prescriptive model. The patient has to hook everything together, and we leave the patient to do what they can do with what information we've given them. So let's then walk through 3 quick slides of a scenario that isn't so much a scenario. It's what's going on today in many places in what's called an advanced patient-centered medical home. And in that kind of a setting, the system will be looking through the electronic health records. It'll be identifying people that are not in control. It'll be assigning care coordinators or care advisors to work with the patient and the doctor. They will engage with the patient. They will understand what their problems are. They will collectively develop a plan, and that plan will consider diet, exercise, medication, etc. They will then work with that plan using paper and calls and electronic journaling as need be, and see what's working and adapt the plan as they go along. And over time, they will actually get the patient into control. And they'll be able to do that with the way things work today, somewhere between 80 and 90% of the time. So we do know how to do better than is normal. But just think about what I described. It is labor-intensive for the health system. It's labor-intensive for the patient. There's a lot of friction in even that system, which is an example of sort of the best standard now. So now the first of 3 future scenarios. I'll call the first one Medical Home 2.0. And in Medical Home 2.0, we do fairly basic things to automate the transmission of physiologic readings and to enhance the feedback to the patient. So that this is quite easy to do with today's technology. You're in essence automating the feedback back and forth. I'll let you all skim that. I don't need to read it. So we've reduced the friction a lot. but it's still largely a healthcare model. So then Medical Home 3.0 takes that, and now it begins to add context. You know, how do we actually work with the patient's menu plans, grocery stores, et cetera, to make it easy to have the right diet? Those kind of things. Again, very easy to do with today's technology, but for it to be done usefully, it's actually got to be able to live within the complexity of that medical plan, and I have not seen examples of us overcoming that linkage. I've seen us being able to work pieces of the problem. I've actually not seen us be able to put them together. But I posit this isn't actually where we want to end up, because it's still a patient care model. So I envision a completely different world. And you know, my wife says that the reason I've been able to do what I've been able to do over the years is because I'm too oblivious to know it can't be done. And she does not always say that in a kind way, because since she lives with the many things I'm oblivious about that can't be done. But this is the picture that I think would be better. So really want to focus. I'd like to shift yesterday from cities to communities. Let's shift from not just healthcare to health, but let's shift to well-being and life management. And let's think about a world in which the phone is instrumented. The home is instrumented, excuse me. So, you know, it knows when I open the refrigerator. It knows where I'm moving. It you know, largely knows, you know, what I'm doing. It knows what the noise levels are. It'll have all sorts of sensors about stress levels and so forth. And collect that data so I can reason across those data streams. I mean, this is one of our current problems with healthcare monitoring. It's still largely one data stream at a time. We're not trying to put together the glucose reading with the activity reading with when I ate something reading. A very basic putting together. But if we're really going to understand what's going on in a person's life, we've got to put many more things together and recognize those patterns. So, I mean, kind of things I'd like to think would be interesting. Suppose there was a little icon that lets you see, does your stress level go up or down when you do retail therapy? So some people, it will go down. Others, it'll go up because they're worried about the money. I mean, it depends. So each of us is going to be different. How do we actually find the ways that work for us? If we could be working with people in that way, one, there's no reason any of that information would need to be exposed to anybody. It ought to be able to live in the home. And it ought to be able to belong to the individual. And the computers can run on those algorithms, and if they discover patterns that look significant, they can then alert the person. You know, there's something going on here with your blood pressure. Would you like us to link that to your healthcare team? Well, if the person said yes, we wouldn't have to ship all this data and inundate the healthcare team. We could simply ship the trend. So we would be able to live in a very different world where instead of connecting the patient into healthcare, what we're doing is getting the patient into a way that they're working with data around their patterns in their choices, one of many of which is health. and appropriately linking in the right resource. It might be the healthcare system. It might be a community agency. It might be Lord knows what. But again, leaving the individual in charge of it. So as we move into the question and answer, I think one of the things I think we have to figure out is where do we want the needle? Because if we set the needle too close to healthcare, we're not likely to have the result that we want, because we're really working in this prescriptive model, and making that model work is not going to get us over the hump. I mean, most patients, well, the data is that patients take medicines as prescribed less than 35% of the time. It's not like we got a small problem here. And so we can get all the, quote, medical part of this stuff right if we don't think engaging and understanding the patient is part of medicine. That's a whole other discussion. But we could get that part right and still have the system not work at all. On the other hand, maybe my vision of the future is too far. And maybe it is so far that people can't engage with it and we will not get traction at all. I don't know. I think that's the kind of thing that as we think through what are the right kind of products we could collectively develop at the intersection of industry and research, those are important questions. So at that point, I'll switch into Q&A until either you don't have something you want to ask me or Beth tells us it's time to quit.
The mics, that would be great, just for the webcast audience as well.
I'm standing right next to one. I'll go first. Is this mic working?
I think so. Really, mine is.
I think that your vision of where we want to end up at, or where you position we want to end up at, makes a lot of sense. We could be at Medical 2.0 or 3.0 pretty quickly. It's really an engineering task and a policy and systems problem. We need to make the payment systems work with those kind of models. But to get to your final vision, there's still a lot of science to do. So is it your thought that we should try to shorter term implement kind of a patient-centered medical home 3.0 while we work on the science to get us to the end game? Or should we just stay where we're at now, tweaking the system while we work on the end goal?
Well, let's play with that a second, because it's a really important question. My hypothesis is that we've got to fix the system from the inside. I don't think that we're going to fix the system from the outside with payment reform. Payment reform is necessary and it's helpful. But as long as we want it to be, as long as we wait for it to be the thing that lets everything else work, we're licked. Because the payment reform is such a blunt instrument. It's not a granular, fine-tuned instrument. And so I guess the question I would come back to you, that put your question with a question, is what are the things we could do in that spectrum could make a big enough difference to change the game within the current reimbursement system? And in particular, if we're doing it, it's the reason I sort of wonder, should we jump to the degree it's done by the things that were mentioned yesterday, mobility, gamifying, et cetera, within the individual space, and beginning to support the things that people want to do in a way that also helps get to where it's easier to connect them to healthcare, I think we could bypass this conundrum. So I guess I would actually like to, I would like to be figuring out how we assemble, what we can assemble now that that brings to life useful versions of 3.0 while we continue to work at 2.0, and then I think, we leapfrog at the end. I don't know if that makes any sense.
If I could just follow up, you make a really valid point there. My fear is that if we try to do what you suggest, what we're going to create is a system of haves and have-nots. And we already have that. I mean, let's be honest. Someone of, our position and, education and income gets a much better health treatment than the person living in Bedford Pines making $3,000 a year. That's already the case. But if we go and start trying to do this piecemeal without payment reform, we're just going to increase that gap. Or can we find some ways, working in the upper end of the healthcare system, that could then spit out low-cost tools to meet the lower end of the market more rapidly and maybe more effectively?
Well, I do not know. I guess I may not be saying it as clearly as I'm trying to, that in 3.0, I'm actually talking about not working in the health system. Yeah. I'm trying to get out of the health system completely and working in a different space. And listening to the counselor yesterday, I'm not sure that with the kind of very low-cost mobile technologies and so forth that are around, that even that in some of the in disadvantaged areas, that we couldn't actually make progress at things they want and like to do and begin to actually shift their decisions, their life decisions, which will in the end have more effect on their long-term health problems than the healthcare system. So if you look at healthcare, 10% of premature mortality in this country is related to healthcare shortfalls. That is access, errors, the whole thing added together. It's 10% of the problem. And we're spending 99% of the money there. And so all I'm advocating, and I guess I can give a little plug for tomorrow. I've been co-chairing a Institute of Medicine committee on how you might include social and behavioral determinants in healthcare, in electronic records. For social behavioral determinants of health in electronic health records. We will publicly release that report in D.C. tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern, and it's webcast. So so people can look at that, because the social and behavioral determinants of health are things we could intervene on that would really be working with the patient's life system. It would change their risk factors. It would get them working in a way that would make it easier to connect them to the health system. We can, in parallel with that, be working on the health system. But I just have this belief that we're going to have to leap forward and fix it outside of healthcare and link it back in. Now, that fixing it outside of healthcare, I don't think is fixed by payment. I think it's actually fixed by creating ways to help people live differently. And I think they have to be able to live differently no matter what their economic level. I mean, you'll be different by different economic levels, but we should all be different. I may be making no sense at all.
Well, I may be double mic'd at this point. So, again, encouraging folks to go into the mic. We can continue Q&A for a bit. So, Bill, another place where these themes are converging is around the aging population. Right? So, you and I have both been in part of meetings where the discussion has been, how do we shift the balance from the predictive healthcare-oriented model to the patient-empowered, up into end-of-life decisions? So if you look at the growth of the aging population and the need, is this going to be a leading case, leading demographic that is going to continue to push these areas, or is it because of the complexity and this really difficult dynamic between healthcare and health? Is it going to lag behind?
No, aging, I think, will have to. The aging group will end up having to drive a lot of this. So these are just paradigm shifts. So we've been talking about, do we fix it in healthcare or do we fix it in the life environment? Another piece that's just there's a lot of confusion about that relates to the elderly. This word palliative care. Palliative care has nothing to do with hospice, with do not resuscitate, with death panels. Palliative care is about an integrated approach. Mm-hmm. Any individual that has a major acute illness or multiple chronic illnesses needs to be engaged in palliative decision making. That will dramatically help. That's a key piece of the elderly. The things you mentioned yesterday, focusing car development on elderly mobility, you're dead on. And that will not only will help the car makers survive the fact that teenagers no longer want cars, it will have a huge effect on health, in addition to quality of life. So I think that people that don't have reserve capacity, it can be a disadvantaged neighborhood, it can be the elderly. It's loss of reserve capacity that we have the most opportunity, I think, to knit things together differently.
So one of the reasons that I worry about the complexity of the situation with the elderly is that in the world of wellness and disease treatment, the goals seem reasonably aligned, right? I want to prevent disease, I want to manage disease, I want to have a successful stay in the hospital. When you start to get to the trade-offs around palliative care, you start talking about more focus on quality of life, more focus on trade-offs, maybe a focus on declining of treatment. And sometimes those seem to be in conflict with each other.
Well,
right? How do we bring the systems together in that way?
Okay, so that's a good question, good point. So let me put another paradigm shift on the table. Okay, as we get older, we are on one medicine per decade on average.
Yep.
Now, I don't know about you, but I have trouble taking 2 pills in the morning, even with a pill box. And I try, since I do better with my blood pressure medicine if I take it at night, I tried to do it at night. But, I have this great advantage. I always get up. I don't always go to bed. So in the end, I had to, so in the end, I have, I know you can think, but you can think they come together, but
yeah, not always.
So in the end, I've compromised, and I do them when I can do them without be very reliable. It's impossible to take 9 meds right. And it's, we know a lot about interaction of individual drugs. We don't know anything about the interactions of 9 drugs. There's no way to compute it. So if I had a magic wand, I would begin to change the complexity problem by sitting down with the patient, figuring out what problems they have. And instead of prescribing all the medicines that they have problems for, I would actually say, what are the 1, 2, or 3 most important? And I would start those. And I would work with you, and if you actually could take those and afford them and consume them, and you didn't have effects, then we could have the conversation, what should we add next? So one way to get at your thing is, instead of thinking about this, is we reach a point we need to start stopping making choices not to do things. What if we started making choices about what to do early on?
Yep.
And if those choices were really around what set of things can we do reliably, which is what it takes to get results. And the we is the whole system. That might change the game. I don't know.
Your wife is right, but we're good.
I know.
Let's take some comments from here.
Hi, thanks for your talk, Bill. Lauren Wilcox, Interactive Computing at Georgia Tech. So I was actually really excited by the many visions that you laid out, particularly the focus on health and wellness. And I also appreciate that you acknowledge that engaging patients is critical for achieving health and wellness. I'm thinking even from when I think about complexity and systems, and from a patient standpoint, I'm thinking, if I have a bunch of sensor data, even if we do achieve, engineering feats of being able to combine these streams and make meaningful use of these streams to detect trends and perhaps alert people to them, we still have to deal with things like health literacy, information overload, from the perspective of individual patients and their family members. The fact that, people may have different expectations of systems than what the data show, things like this. And so we're starting to see this, I think, in the personal informatics space a lot. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that and where you see some promising research agendas around, patient-centered ways of being informed about some of your own data and comparing your data to population-level data, things like that. Because if we're really going to place this information in people's hands, we also have to help them interpret the information and act upon it.
No, Lauren, very, very good question. At its heart, I think the answer lies in visualization, and it lies in visualization that brings many things together. So I think we're going to have to learn how to create satellite views and Doppler radar views and rain gauge views and make it so people can move between them. So we've learned how to do this in a lot of the physical world. So the way we manipulate with Google World and so forth is an example. That's the way we've got to be able to look at what is our state and what is the context of that state, and then we ought to be able to then say, okay, let me push. If I do this, run the simulation. What will I look like? So we've got to have a way of translating the choices into meaningful experiences that can help people make decisions without them needing to understand the biology or the chemistry or the sociology. And so I think, there's a huge research problem in how we create those visualizations, how we enable them by modeling. As I listened to the SMART, we'll now call communities discussion yesterday, and you got at this a little bit with the enterprise analytics at the end with Raul's work. But, I hunger for us to be able to present to communities models that let them see the complexity of the decisions and actually let them figure out, of the 3,000 things they're thinking about, which one actually might change the game. Because it's one, it's not 1,000. And right now, we don't have any way of doing that. I think and those people are not going to be any more literate about all that. So this business of how we make visualizations that work with our pattern recognition capability without us having to be but so literate is, I think, a grand research challenge.
Thanks.
Is that fair?
One more.
Yeah.
I wanted to thank you. It was really great to hear the pieces and so as concerns you brought up from research and data and where it is still not in the system. And I'm going to bring the individual perspective again. It is very disappointing when you need to run around and working maybe with 6 different healthcare groups. Nobody knows. The medications are not monitored or the interaction of, especially with people with multiple problems. The disconnect, the empowerment of, yes, I don't want to be empowered too much, even though, I am with 2 PhDs, and I think I read a lot and maybe too much with the internet regarding the health, but don't empower me too much because I still need your expertise as a healthcare professional. The well-being, you said, it suffers not only with physical, we're neglecting the mental part, because when you don't take care of that. So it is a big mess unless you are in an institution like Vanderbilt, or if you're cared and everyone is. So I'm not seeing that model. It takes 3-4 months of review to be even accepted to a comprehensive mental health, healthcare institution where individual is viewed as a whole, not just one piece. And the difficulty in that, where are we going to go with that? I'm ready to give up and say, okay, I'm not taking any medications because I don't know what to do. I cannot tolerate nine pills. And which one and how I'm going to still function and be productive in the society is just such a challenge for individuals when you think about it. And where is the model? I mean, where do we go?
Well, you and I go to the same church about the problem. I think you might be well advised to stop taking part of what you're prescribed. So your reaction is right. How we shift, I personally think it's going to take a series of levers. I think we're going to have to take advantage of both new technology and sort of the Gen Y mindset to begin to create different kind of communities that are inherently better life management communities. That will begin to shift the long-term sustainability. We're going to have to continue to work on payment reform. We still have a lot of states that haven't opted into the Medicaid expansion, including Tennessee. We have also got to change the professional culture of healthcare, of medicine. I was raised to care for and about the patient, not their disease. It happens because I was raised by my father. That's a whole other story. But today's physicians have been raised in a highly technical environment, and they are hyper subspecialized, and they've been raised to take care of parts of the patient. That's got to change. That's a professional responsibility. So I think we've got to act all across the ecosystem. And I'm oblivious enough to believe we can do it.
How are we going to do it? What is the good example of a system that's working?
Well,
do we have one?
We have examples of systems that do part of it.
Part of it.
Kaiser does certain things well. The VA does certain things well. Vanderbilt does certain things well. Emory does certain things well. We've got examples of part of it. We've actually got to figure out how to put them together in a sustainable way. And the challenges are no more or no less than education, environment, and energy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.